Our next speaker will not be speaking. We will call him S. S will not be speaking tonight because S is a victim or survivor of child abuse. S is now an adult with a family of his own, and due to the stigma of being a victim, yes, due to the stigma of being a victim, S is currently unwilling for you, the public, to know his identity. S is concerned about negative consequences of being known to be a victim of child abuse for him and for his family. And S is perhaps the most courageous person that I know. An important part of magen's work is to change attitudes in our community, and in particular to give all victims of child abuse the support, the respect, and the dignity that they desperately need so that, in the words of Elise Pollock, who's here, they can indeed become survivors rather than victims. S has kindly written up his personal story for the first time in his life to be presented to you tonight. Eugene Weisberg is a man of so many talents, it's rather hard to keep up. He's a magician, an entertainer, a gifted photographer, and he is taking on a new role tonight. Eugene will be reading the story of our anonymous child abuse survivor, the story of S.
I just wanted to apologize up front to the Tzibur and the author of this incredible letter, if in some way I don't accurately represent it and give it the emotion and sincerity it deserves. Good evening. This is the first time I'm ever telling my story publicly. And at this point, I would like to continue to remain anonymous. I'm a regular guy. We may daven in the same shul. Our kids may even be in the same class. We may even be close friends. Yet, you have no idea what I've been through. I want you to understand that this isn't just something that happens to other people's kids. It can and does happen to any of us. And the most important thing you can do is to be educated about child abuse, to protect your kids better, and to be supportive of the victims. In my story, you will hear about how I was groomed by a pedophile, about the attack itself, and how all the rabbis and important figures in my life tried to cover it up. You will hear how, through the support of my mom, how I was able to overcome those challenges and get the attacker finally off the streets. My parents are both professionals and made Aliyah from the States when I was a kid. We moved to a new frum town that was just being established. When I was 13, I was walking home with my friends. A car stopped. A Hasidic guy called us over and asked if anyone was interested in work. I had done odd jobs in the past, and I was interested. I had learned at home not to get into a car with a stranger, but this was a job, and he was clearly from. I later learned that his name was Nachman Stahl, a married father of 7 from Jerusalem who was involved in many community projects. I got into the car, and he explained that he was creating a phone book for the region and would need to collect contact details from new neighbors. I got forms, was assigned to a street, and went door to door to collect people's contact details. I worked after school for the next few weeks. Every couple of days, he would meet me in his car, take the completed forms, give me new ones, and pay me. He started suddenly acting strangely, though. For example, I would be holding the forms on my lap. he would push down on the forms and give me a smile. Other times, when I was getting out of the car, he would, quote unquote, help me by pushing my backside and giving me a smile. I realized that this was strange, but it wasn't overly alarming. He was a frum guy, and I was making money. Well, I finished my assigned area, gave in the forms, and then did not see him for a few weeks. One evening, I was playing soccer with my friends near my house. He pulled up in an open-backed van, which was piled high with published phone books. He asked me to come distribute the books with him. Due to his strange behavior till then, I knew that I shouldn't go anywhere far alone with him, so I refused, even though he did try convincing me. I carried on playing, debating in my mind, and then I changed my mind. This is a frum guy, it's a lot of money, and hey, I'm not a little kid anymore. So I called him and agreed to do it. When he came, he sent me to the Makolet to buy some oil. I asked him what kind. He said any. We drove around, dropping piles of phone books off at a few places. We were driving on a highway, and he started touching my private parts. I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed with fear. He pulled over in a gas station, told me to zip up, and that he's getting me ice cream. He left. I sat there, confused, not knowing what to do. Those were some of the longest minutes of my life. Should I run? But I had no idea where I was. So I stayed in the car until he returned. He continued driving and then pulled into a forest. He drove till he reached some picnic benches. It was pitch dark outside. He said, I shouldn't be scared. He does this with lots of boys, and it's fun. He took the bottle of oil that I bought him and told me to get out of the car. I don't want to get too detailed, but he raped me. He then drove me back home. On the way, he warned me not to tell anyone. He told me to repeat after him that I forgive him. It took a lot of guts, but I asked him, why did you do this to me? Aren't you married? He said, when you're older, you'll understand that sometimes your wife is usser. I went home and pretended that nothing had happened. I was always a good kid in school. The rest of that year, though, was in stark contrast. I skipped class more than I went and just hung out with my friends. My grades went way down. I was outwardly frum, but from behind closed doors, I didn't believe in anything anymore. My parents saw my grades going down and tried talking with me about it, but I insisted nothing was wrong. I was scared, and I planned never to tell anybody. That summer, we moved to Jerusalem. I was standing at the curb watching the movers take the boxes out of the truck when I saw Nachman. My heart sank. He came up to me and said, how nice. I live next door. I couldn't believe it. I was dazed. The next few months were horrible. Whenever he would see me, he would try to touch me and ask me to come with him on a trip. I would refuse, but I was terrified of him. I didn't know what to do. My frumkeit suffered even more. I would watch him davening in the very front of the shul with the longest and most kavana-looking Shmona Esrei. It made me see religion as one big hypocrisy. After a few months of this, I couldn't continue. So I told a friend that someone was hitting on me. Some guy was hitting on me. Without telling him exactly the details of what had happened, Apparently, the story must have got out because I was sitting in yeshiva one day when the mashgiach calls me into his office. He showed me a piece of paper with Nachman's name and phone number. I burst into tears. I told him everything. I was upset that he found out, but on the other hand, I was incredibly relieved that now finally someone will take care of this. He called Nachman and told him that he knows everything, the whole story. He told Nachman never to speak to me again. Nachman said that I was the one that wanted it, and he would never do it with someone that didn't want to, basically admitting to his entire story. In the following weeks, Nachman avoided me, but I was crushed. After harboring this inside of me for over a year, now somebody authoritative knows about it, and that's all they do. I felt betrayed and refused to stay in the yeshiva. I was sent to meet with a psychologist to help me understand what I wanted out of life at this point. And during my meetings with him, the story did come out. He slowly persuaded me to tell my parents what had happened. One evening, my parents went to meet with him. When my parents came home, I was in bed, pretending to be asleep. I heard my mom crying and felt her kissing me on my head. From then on, I felt an enormous support from my mom, which made a huge difference in my life. My mom wanted to protect other kids from getting hurt. She called up an organization that Nachman was involved with and warned them about him. They refused to listen, telling her that it was false. This Nachman is a big tzaddik, a Baal Chesed. Well, I decided with my mother's support to finally go to the police. They got testimony from the mashgiach of the yeshiva that Nachman admitted to him on the phone that something had happened. Now, telling over the details to the police was therapeutic, not as traumatic as I thought, because for the first time, someone actually cared enough to do something about it. That was truly the turning point in my life, and I slowly got back into my studies and my religious belief. Nachman was arrested and released on bail to house arrest. Before the court date, he escaped to England for 4 years. He then came back to Israel, was arrested again, and a new court date was scheduled. As the court date got closer, I came under huge amounts of pressure. This was a very difficult time for me. A number of times, my ex-mashgiach came to my yeshiva telling me that Nachman did tshuva, and so I have to tell the court that I don't remember any details. A very well-known and respected Jerusalem rabbi came to my yeshiva. You have to understand, this was a rabbi of such stature that the very idea of him coming to a yeshiva, to stand and wait outside my shiur just to see a bachur, was astounding. He said that he knows Nachman's family, that they are undergoing a lot of pain, and I'm not allowed to make it worse by testifying the truth. Nachman's wife and her father came to my yeshiva one evening, both crying and begging me not to testify. His wife kept on telling me how I stole her husband from her and that her kids are starving since their father had to leave the country for years. The mashgiach came once with a very important askan, the gabbai of a top gadol b'Yisrael, to tell me that I'm not allowed to testify. I was incredibly confused. So at one point, I consulted with the big Rav. He told me that I should testify, but I should not tell anybody that he told me to, since there would be a lot of backlash. I was very taken aback by the fact that he wouldn't stand behind it, but I was used to that already. This time, it was me against the world. I was all on my own. I also became aware that I was not the only victim of Nachman's stall, but I was only one of his victims I was the only one of his victims willing to take a stand and fight back. At the trial, I watched the mashgiach tell the court how he doesn't remember the details of the phone call with Nachman, and if he really even admitted to what I claimed took place. I just sat there feeling betrayed all over again. A couple of weeks later, they announced the verdict. Nachman was found guilty. That night, Nachman escaped the country again to England, where he hid for a few more years. But one day, Nachman's car broke down. A police car stopped to help. And then they realized that this was a wanted man. He was arrested and immediately extradited to Israel. They set a new sentencing date, and this time without bail. Before the sentencing, I was approached by a very large local tzedakah organization. They told me that they were sent by different organizations that support Nachman's family, and that it will cost them a lot of money to support such a large family if he goes to jail for a long time. They offered me a bribe of 50,000 shekel. If I would simply write a letter saying that I forgive Nachman so that the sentencing would be light, I refused. They tried offering the bribe with even more money, but I refused once again. I wasn't aware of this at the time, but Banim and the Gebayim who tried to intimidate and bribe me into lying to the court were themselves committing a criminal offense. Under Israeli law, the punishment for intimidating a witness or interfering with the course of justice adds up to about 8 years in prison. At the sentencing, a number of rabbis came to speak on Nachman's behalf. They told the court what a good man he is and how much he and his family suffered. 2 rabbis actually flew in from England for this great cause. The judges were so appalled that they had all totally disregarded me and treated Nachman as the victim. At the end, Nachman, finally, was sentenced to 13 years in jail. When I heard the sentencing, it was a feeling that I cannot describe. I finally had closure after all these years. Finally, he wasn't a threat to other children. Nachman submitted an appeal a few months ago to the Supreme Court, which was utterly rejected. It is now truly over. The purpose of my telling this story tonight is simple. I don't want what happened to me to happen to any other child. All parents should learn how to more effectively protect their kids. In my case, it took literally years for my parents to find out. I hid it, and my parents didn't pick up on it. Baruch Hashem, when they finally did, I got the support I needed, which no one else in the world was willing to give me. I had experienced a second abuse, though. I was systematically abused by some of the leading Rabbanim and Mostos in Israel. Tragically, in many cases, they invariably sided with the abusers against the children. And by doing so, they've enabled abusers to continue their attacks, and they've destroyed the lives of hundreds of child abuse victims, destroyed their emunah, and in some cases, even driven abused children to suicide. There needs to be a revolution in the way the frum world and the leadership relate to child abuse. The good news is that incredible and courageous people like Dr. David Pelkovitz, Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz, Rabbi Yaakov Haber are out there educating the public and generating change. Here in Beit Shemesh, Magen is doing amazing life-saving work. If only Magen had been there for me and my family all those years ago. I wish Magen every bracha and practical support to continue their avodas kodesh. And for all you parents who care so much that you've come out here on a winter's night to learn more about protecting our children, kol hakavod. This is the beginning of changing our community and making it a safer place for all our kids, so that what happened to me won't happen to other children. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Thank you for listening to my story.